Ms. Trudy Schaefer from the League of Women Voters opportunity to address the commission, as she's one of the Redistricting California partners, so she can just inform the public and inform the commission on what they see their role as. If you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Dye and members of the Commission. And I only need to speak briefly, and I'm speaking for the League of Women Voters and myself because the Redistricting CA Collaborative, it is actually Redistricting California Alliance, is not a formal organization that, for whom I can speak in their behalf without having talked to all the member organizations. But I was watching the webcast of your proceedings, and a few minutes ago it seemed that it would help if I could say a little bit about the goals and the process of Redistricting CA. In particular, the goal is to encourage the greatest public participation in the process of redistricting as possible. And of course, a year ago, that goal was to encourage the public to apply to the commission, and we felt that we were we contributed to what you know was a very, very successful application and selection process. This year, we have been working toward uniting the efforts of the various organizations whom you saw in the booklet to get the word out to people all around California about what redistricting is, what is going on with the process of the commission, and how they can give input to the commission. Yesterday's conference in Southern California was a major culmination of working toward that goal. We believe there will probably be another conference in Northern California in March with more or less the same topics, but of course it will be more informed by where you are in your process at that time. The other aspect that I wanted to comment on was that the booklet, and I'm fumbling through my papers, but the one you have in your hands, is indeed intended to be widely distributed, and I feel that the people who worked on it, all of us had just a small hand, but that it is very much, in layperson's terms, what people need to know so that they feel comfortable with what is going to happen with the maps in California, and as I've said repeatedly now, how they can have a hand in it. And many of the organizations will be distributing it, and as Chairman Dye commented, it's available on the website so it can be printed out by anyone. It does speak to how I can participate in Redistricting California, attend a public meeting, and those meetings that we're talking about are your meetings. It is not that the individual organizations will be holding any kind of parallel set of hearings. Rather, they will be having meetings all around the state as educational forums, or in some cases, meetings where they reach out to their constituencies to train them, to help them understand how best they can give you input. For example, we often say, and I think this may be the best way of input, will be to give you a map, whether it's produced by Google Maps or whether it's a map from the gas station or AAA, on which they draw the outline of what they consider to be their community of interest. And of course, your staff or consultants will have the task of translating that into a manner that you can use for to be incorporated into your database. And of course, some will be no more sophisticated than what I just described. Others will be able to incorporate lots of background data into what they give you, and it will just be a matter of plugging it in and it's in your database. But it's very important for us to know that, and for you to know that we are here to serve you, but we are not planning any kind of parallel activity. I think we'll be very busy, and I hope that we will, that busyness will have a lot of fruit, in that you will hear from people in California. And if you read through the booklet, I think it's an excellent description of the kinds of things that people should think about as they prepare testimony for your commission, whether they come in public to one of your hearings or whether they present it by mail or over the internet. But I just wanted to make it clear that we are not in any way attempting to compete, and we are very aware also that individual small communities of interest want to be able to give you their information, but it's really difficult to for public citizens to take a tack at drawing, say, a whole map, And we are aware of the dangers of looking at a single district because of the ripple effect of up and down the state by what you draw for any one district. So we're trying to let the public know and give whatever assistance we can, whether it's sophisticated or not very sophisticated, so that they give you the most useful information they can. And I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions or other people from the Redistricting CA Collaborative would be.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Schaefer.
Thank you.
That was very helpful. I wanted to let the rest of the commission know that we will plan to go into closed session at 3:30 to hear from Mr. Claypool, his recommendation for the public information officer, and to give any feedback on that, so just so we can plan our discussion accordingly. Meanwhile, hopefully everyone has gotten their copy of the process flow. And do you want to start, Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, first of all, this is an important line on here. It's an initial thoughts on the process flow, not the final thoughts, I'm sure. But what it did, it was, as we were talking in previous meetings, it sounded to me like we were fundamentally saying we have to have this outreach program and get the citizens' preferences. And as was indicated just momentarily ago,
Mr. Baraba, could you talk directly into the microphone?
Okay, here we go. We'd get a lot of information that's brought together, but as was pointed out just recently, we're going to have to define those preferences into alternative approaches to redistricting. And so in essence, we're going to have to translate everything we hear into a form that we could actually deal with. And from that, we would then, as a commission, turn that over to a technical team who would have access to the tools that allow you to try to respond to those approaches that are being suggested. And once we see those, we then would engage in another outreach program to gain citizen reaction to the various alternatives that we might be looking at. And then you notice there's feedback loops here throughout the whole process, because my guess is as we hear things, we'll want to go back and do some redrawing and things of that nature to some of the ideas that come forward. And at some point, though, as that's why we got to put dates on this, we're going to have to determine the best solution and to bring that forward, and at that time publicize the decision that we made, because not only at that point it's no longer seeking feedback, because we've done that through the whole process. And I think the other nice thing about this is that we would then have documentation available to us on the basis of these different activities as to what we heard, how we reacted to it, and then the action that we finally took. And so that people could see the extent to which we actually listened on what happened, but then there may be some things that we're asked to do that are going to be very difficult to do, or the numbers just don't allow you to pull it off, and at that point we should be able to explain why we couldn't do some of the things that were asked for. Or if we could do them, then that's the easy part. So anyway, that was the idea of the flow chart, just to kind of get on paper a description of what we had been talking about, and I think it reflects to some extent the discussions that we've been having. And as they were coming up again today, it just reminded me that we might want to have something like this in front of us with dates on it, and so that we are in a position to play according to the schedule.
And Commissioner Barrow, I really appreciate this. And what would help me, and maybe it's just me, but I would love it if you could maybe expand on this in terms of what we were talking about earlier. I think you have a very technical way maybe of speaking, but it would be helpful for me if maybe we put it into feedback from the community or drawing maps. Maybe something a little more, is there any way that can be done?
There's
in terms
no,
of
any of this could be changed. I think what's in the boxes, the intent of the boxes is the important, how they're described.
the translated?
There are
I
people
guess I was
better than
looking
I
at what
at doing that.
we had talked about earlier, some of those steps of getting data from the census and then getting the outreach meetings and then the initial maps. And I'm assuming that's what you mean by these, but I was just hoping for clarification of which one corresponded with those earlier discussions.
And
maybe it's just, it's
This,
my
this was
ability.
pretty much about an hour's endeavor in trying to capture what we were saying.
Okay.
But, and there could be more boxes on there too, to expand on what we mean by outreach and where the different outreach activities could come from.
So that would be out, this is outreach.
Okay, so maybe I can help.
Yeah.
So,
This is my marketing director.
Yeah. Translate for me, Cynthia.
So, combination of compilation of the feedback we've gotten, Commissioner Antai's schedule here. It sounds like we are, probably going to take, most of, probably a good part of February. We'll finish doing the housekeeping and setup and finish hiring our staff and continuing the process discussions and organization. And then what I heard was that probably March through April, Lou was suggested that we'll do the vast majority of our input meetings. So that would be the 50 outreach meetings that we were talking about previously. And in that period of time, we expect to get the complete census data as of April 1st. And then moving on, between April 1st and June 1st, we will draft our first map.
Could I interpret that if you're just looking at the arrow going from the left to the right in the middle of the box, the third arrow between the technical team identifies alternative maps to achieve objective, and the CRC engages in outreach program, that would be the draft map,
Correct.
Yes.
and that'll be
So that's
By
12,
June
that's
1st.
June 1st, okay?
Yep. Then after that, we will engage in the feedback sessions, which right now we're conceptualizing as regional meetings of the full commission, with details to be determined later after we have more input from experts. And then with a goal, until we get further advice from our soon-to-be hired chief counsel, that we would, we have a July 1 pre-clearance deadline for the 4 counties in question.
So if I were to draw a fifth arrow at the end of the rightmost box, the output of that would be the final map, and that'll be July 1st?
Well, our final map will actually be August 1st, where we will post
The map that we submit
for Department of
pre-clearance?
Justice pre-clearance. I'm not totally sure about that. My understanding of the process actually was that August 15th was our date, and that included, the reason it got moved up 1 month was precisely because of pre-clearance. That was my understanding, but it sounds like some other commissioners have different understanding, so I think we should defer that since we clearly don't have accurate information on that. So it's either July 1st or it's August 15th, but in any case, we know that the August 1st is actually when we have to be done, because we have to post it for 14 days. So August 1st is our actual posting of the final maps. The first, because we have to, by the Voters First Act, we have to give the public 14 days to comment.
So between the August 1st and June 1st, we in essence have 2 months to,
To get reaction and to tweak the maps.
right, okay?
That would be between May 1st and July 1st, right? May and June, we have to tweak the maps.
Well, we're actually saying our
July.
draft
June,
maps will be
July,
June
okay.
1st.
Okay.
I
Now,
mean,
since we're not going to get the data until April 1st, can I interpret these, again, strictly looking at the arrow going from left to the right, the second arrow between the second box and the third box, could I interpret that date to be April 1st? Because that's the earliest day you can start drawing the map with data.
One of the things we might be able to do is to get an approximation of what the data is going to look like by using some existing data. And I'm not sure that's doable, but I think it's something we should look into, particularly when we have our consultants on board. And then that would allow us to at least start getting a better picture of it, not to lock in on it, but get an idea of where the changes.
We may not have enough data to make a decision, but I'd like to spend a minute or two to discuss that, because my feeling is if we have any kind of straw man map to show people, then we can discuss the data we need, or the inputs, in a more precise manner as compared to not having any kind of map to look at. So I'm one that really would like to see any kind of map, and lacking that is what Commissioner Forbes suggests, using the existing district map. But that to me is not a really very attractive option. So if we can have any kind of preliminary map, even if it's not based on actual data, I kind of find that to be an extremely beneficial tool.
I think we might be able to ask that question of statewide database, what their plans are relative to preliminary approximate data. And we get a better
I
feel for
believe that the data that you're looking at may not be coming directly from the census.
No,
right?
what they would be doing is getting the American Community Survey
Right.
monthly surveys that aggregate up over time. So it would be an average of about 5 years, but they could actually break that down, I think, down to the census tract.
Oh, the data come from them as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yeah, we will have access to information, it just won't be final and complete until probably April 1st. I mean, there's also the possibility we'll get it earlier, it's just that California's almost always been last. So,
Could I suggest maybe since we have some actual physical data, I'm kind of a little bit like Commissioner Antai. I like working with the dates. Maybe we could structure what Commissioner Bravas has done here and start with dates and then attach the tasks and how these have been defined here. That just happens to be, I think, easier for me and maybe easier for the public to see based on dates what we're shooting for. And then under those dates, you could see the description of what we'll be doing.
yeah, I think that would be very helpful. And some of this is kind of, it's describing our internal decision-making process. For example, discussing alternative approaches to redistricting. I assume, for example, that could mean answering the question of, do we start with a blank slate? Do we start with existing maps? Do we start from the top of the state? Do we start with the bottom of the state? Those are alternative approaches. We can, talk about that in the absence of data.
And maybe if we had a timeline associated with those, we should have those discussions before some of these actual things take place. So, again, maybe merging. And of course, our dates are subject to quite a bit of change, but it gives us something to work with.
Yeah. And for example, the whole issue of nesting, there's some really complex questions associated with that. And although it's an ideal that you might want to shoot for, other things get in the way of pulling it off. And but that would be an alternative. What I meant by an alternative, to find out what we could do using some imaginative approaches and trying to reach other objectives.
Again, in the process, searching for a date, since April 1st is the date that we're going to have the actual data, March 1st is just around the corner. Is a date between March 1st and April 1st a good date to get the preliminary data to try to come up with a set of map? Mr. Baraba?
I think that's a question for Friday afternoon.
All right. All right.
So, so we have a couple of placeholders right now. I do think this discussion will be informed significantly by our presentation on Friday. So I guess my question to the Commission right now is there more that we would like to discuss on this before that presentation, or should we wait till it's informed by some more information?
I think we've gone as far as we can at this point.
Okay, that's great.
May I comment on that?
Sure.
It seems like perhaps the date can't be identified until from the speaker until Friday. But But that date kind of sets a deadline for us in terms of doing outreach. For example, if we are only at the midpoint of our 50 meeting outreach, then only half of the input will be able to be interjected into this first draft, okay? Do you follow me at this point?
Well, so let me respond to that. One of my thoughts, and I made this comment at a previous meeting, is that we are going to probably be in the situation of having to continue to take input while we start drawing the maps, because of course we're not going to be able to draw the maps overnight. So, you know, for example, if we've, just to throw this out, because we haven't decided how we're going to approach this, but I'm sure the outreach subcommittee is going to hash this out a little bit more. If we, for example, happen, you know, have all of our input from the Section 5 districts and from Section 5 counties and, say, Northern California, we would actually be in a good position to start drawing that as we are still collecting, you know, input from Southern California. Just throwing those out as examples. I mean, the point is we're not going to be able to instantaneously start on some things. It's a big state. So I think we probably have a little bit of luxury to overlap.
We have a little bit of wiggle room.
A little bit of wiggle
yeah.
room.
I know we need to wrap this up. I guess I see it just to sort of even have us fine tune a little bit more before we. So we have to post our draft maps by June 1st. We get the data April 1st. So all of April and all of May, we are taking data and drawing maps. So that's what that time period, without all the little subtleties of are we taking testimony at the same, but that's what we do April and May. Get data, review it, draw maps. That means to me that March is in its majority, and because February's gone unless we just decide to do something with that last meeting in February, which we have discussed tentatively doing that. That means March is when we have to take hold all the meetings where we take, you know, we hear from the public about what they want to see in terms of communities of interest, what all of that, because we really need that in order to start drawing maps. I mean, we could do some initial technical, proportions, numbers, you know, but the reality is that we should, as much as possible, it seems to me, have heard
Most of it.
most of it so that when we get the data,
That we're ready.
we're ready.
Right.
So that means, to me, March
Is intense.
is holding these meetings where we
Yeah.
take testimony from folks. That's March. April, May, we're working. I think it's a question we have to resolve whether we're doing that and holding meetings. And then we have to post June 1. And the final is August 1. Okay? So that really means June and July, we're going back out. And I'm just, I know this is obvious, but I'm just trying to, June and July, we go back out and get feedback. And maybe not just from communities, from a lot of, that's where we get experts in this and all of that. That's June and July. So just to start us thinking in these increments and really focusing us on the fact that March
Is very key.
Is really when we need to go out and get input from
So
public.
the first box is March.
Yeah.
Right, okay, good.
Commissioner Yao.
First March, this is March.
I think that's the same point I was trying to get to when Commissioner Antai suggests that some of the outreach meeting can go into April and May. I think that's way too late. And because we're going to be actually working with real data starting April 1st. So to get 50 meetings in, you're not going to be able to get 50 meetings in on March. So you probably,
Have to
or
do
we
it.
probably have to get going very quickly in the month of February as well.
Right. So originally, we had talked about March and April, and the reason I included April and assumed that we might have to do some of in parallel, just because I think it's
Yeah, we may have
it's
some
physically
stragglers coming in
impossible for us to do
April,
50
but,
meetings in 1 month.
Right.
The other thing is because the data shows up on April 1st doesn't mean it's going to be available to be used. So there's got to be there's a lot of work going on to making it fast, but that's another question we could address on Friday.
Well, since you want to jump into a little bit more, it's not ending yet. The first block then, by the way, I would suggest everybody grab your pens and label each block starting from the left to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, so that we don't have to search for words. So block 1 is all of March and all of April. Do we all agree to that?
No, I think the April's disappeared, a lot of April.
I would
disappeared.
suggest February and March.
Okay. So
And then if we miss a few dates, and if we miss a few areas in March, then we can go into first part of April. But I definitely don't see us doing the bulk of that activity in April.
Okay, so block 1 would be all of
February
February
and March.
all of March.
And potentially a little bit of April if we haven't gotten
Right.
the data.
Right.
So what happens in block 2 now?
Okay, block 2 is, we take that information.
It's really philosophical.
Commissioner
Bravo
No, I wouldn't call it philosophical.
No.
That equipment and the software that's available requires very specific direction. You don't give it a philosophical statement. You got to say, this is specifically what we want to accomplish. So we talk. Yeah, but I guess the term philosophical is one I would not choose. I would say operational statements that can be translated into action. And I would say that you'll see a lot of overlap between 2 and 3, and there'll be a lot of interaction between our discussions, and we'd want to have the technical team be a part of the discussion that's going on in 2, because they'll help us straighten out some of the operational definitions that are coming forward and things of that nature.
Yeah, that makes sense.
May I ask for a clarification between boxes 1 and 2? I've heard a couple of different things from my fellow commissioners in terms of how these two relate, and one school of thought is that we really need to have the first round of outreach complete before we sit down and start tinkering with any of the maps. And the second was that there may be some overlap while we're still gathering information and while we begin to draw the maps. And I think if we could make some agreement on which of those angles we're interested in pursuing just preliminarily, that would help.
I think the issue about whether you run into April is a function of when the data gets transferred into an operational format. And all that's saying is we might have a little more time in the
A week or
early
two,
part
yeah.
of April to continue the
Yeah.
outreach.
So then if I was to apply what you're saying, if the data is available on April 1st and we're not done with the outreach, we go ahead and jump into the data and start working on maps.
Yeah. And I would say that, you could still have an outreach meeting while you're identifying alternatives. So I don't think we have to stop if there's a meeting going on. Because this is very early in the process. I mean, very early in this particular process.
Okay, so there is some concurrence between 1 and 2 potentially.
Yeah.
Commissioner Yao?
The way I see box number 1 is those are the 50 meetings, those are the 50 outreach meetings. Box number 2 is what we previously called business meetings, okay? That's when the entire commission get together and start talking about different approaches, different philosophies, different preferences, different priorities, and in other words, coming up with a set of direction or orders of importance to guide the technical team in the drawing of the map.
So-
That's how I would see it. So while all the outreach meetings are going on in box 1, box 2 would basically be the meeting that involves the entire group of us in making guidance decisions.
And so box 2 would actually be across the board.
That's the way I would see it. I don't know whether anybody else.
I agree. It's probably concurrent because it's going to be informed as we get data and as, as more information comes in.
In some ways, that the term, I mean, I think what we're going to do in box 2, I think what we'll do in box 2 is to translate what we heard into an operational set of definitions. And by that I mean terms that can be used by the technical team to actually start drawing lines using the equipment and the data.
I think both boxes 2 and 3 are kind of process things as
Yeah.
opposed to steps in the
Yeah.
in the milestone.
I agree.
Can I volunteer Commissioner Antai to draw one that's based on dates and actual milestones and, that separates out the stuff that we'd probably be doing in our meetings in terms of,
I would be happy to do that.
Okay.
I'll take a first shot, and you can all take darts and throw at it.
As an architect, I would appreciate a house, but not a house of cards.
okay. So,
We want to see wheels on this, Mick.
and it should be in 3D, of course. So I think we have that, and we'll get some more information on Friday. So speaking of Friday, probably we're going to have both of our expert presentations on Friday because of the interview schedule. Since the commission agreed to interview 4 finalists for chief counsel, it actually takes up a good amount of our time tomorrow, and we'll be spending most of it in closed session doing the interviews, and it's going to, we can't get our original schedule because of a conflict. So I guess my only comment is hopefully the selection process for Commissioner Kuo's replacement will be relatively speedy because we'll have to start with that to make sure that gets covered on Friday. I wonder if we want to go into closed session now. I think we're at a good break point.
Should I? The education discussion that we had before we break, shall we try to come up with some kind of directive on that or some kind of approach on that?
Right, that's a good point. When we closed the discussion, it was brought up by Commissioner Blanco that it's not a requirement under the Act for us to take on education, and in fact, there are a wealth of other organizations who have taken on that task. I know, for me personally, my thought was for education, it was education with a small e, in that since we're going to be out there in the public and having meetings, that we would use, as we've discussed before, the first part of our meeting just to introduce ourselves and do a little, overview. I did not personally envision the commission actually going out and doing training sessions for the public. So I wanted to see what other commissioners thought on that.
Oh, that was my view of it. I think that we want to give just an encapsulated summary of what this is about that would help the public participate. But beyond that I think there's going to be lots of other folks doing it. I just decided to see our sort of canned 3 or 4 minute introduction to each of our outreach meetings.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think once we get this drawing and chart laying out how we're going to do it, that we would have our public information team sit down with the group that produced this brochure and see if we could get them to carry on that message for us. This is how it's going to be done. In other words, on page 7, they have a who draws the line. We ought to just have a page 7.A that says, and here's how they're going to do it.
So if I may, maybe I can suggest that we direct staff to work with the what's a good term for the coalition, for the group that's
Redistricting CA.
to help the redistricting commission to fulfill the education of the citizens in the redistricting matter.
Yeah, I believe that's her charter anyway, so regardless of what we do.
Right, and,
we're going to do that.
and maybe formally stated that we will not have any role, the commission itself will not have any role in the education process.
But
I don't think that's what we're saying, but Commissioner Nantai?
let's be clear, though. What do we mean by education? Can I have a definition of that? Because even teaching people what redistricting maps should be is education. So what do we mean by that?
Someone else want to take that? Commissioner Aguirre?
I don't think I could actually render a definition that would be acceptable to all of it. My earlier comments about education related to the fact that there's another aspect to outreach that's called engagement. It's not a one-way process where the public comes and presents information to us, and as I mentioned before, we take that information, work it in a black box, and come back and say this is what it's all about. In the discussion that we've had, we've talked about doing that, but we've also included going back to them and showing them some potential draft maps so that they could weigh in on their reactions to that and giving us some feedback. The education aspect of the process itself, we do have organizations like the League of Women Voters, Cause, Common Cause, others that I think are doing an excellent job in that arena. And I would add to that they're looking at us very carefully so we give them something to run with.
Right.
And up until now, I don't think we've been able to do that. We're working. I think we're making very good progress on this. The questions, if I were in the field in one of these organizations, I would say, are they going to come out? Are they going to be doing outreach? Will we have a chance to dialogue with them on some of our ideas related to communities of interest? All of those questions. How long is the process for? Is the outreach process? When will the maps come out? What kind of feedback will we be able to give on the maps? Is the commission open to presentations by ourselves as an alliance of organizations? All of these questions are kind of still up in the air, and I hope that we will clarify this very, very soon. But again, going back to the idea of education, the redistricting process itself, they are doing some great work in that area, but my comment was that we should be transparent in the handling of maps, in the philosophical approach that we take on the maps, on what kind of operational guidance, as Mr. Baraba said, we're giving to our tech team so that we can tweak it here, tweak it there. I think the public has a role to play in that process as well. So this is where the business meetings come in. So anyway, that's a long way. That's a long statement to simply say that I'm not going to try to define education for you.
So go ahead, Commissioner Yao.
If I can get everybody to turn to page 9 of the brochure, I think the author of this particular brochure has done a very good job. The heading of this page is called "How Can I Participate in Redistricting California?" To me, the education process is really that, teaching them how to participate in the redistricting process. I think at the beginning, we have the education process is to get them to understand what redistricting process is, and toward the end is really how to modify the redistricting process. So I think just a single thought, how citizens can participate in the redistricting California, is how I envision what the education is about.
Commissioner Brown?
I agree. I think this brochure, and the more I look at it, it's really well done. And I would be interested, not right now, but we should be thinking about what we could do for a second version of this that would incorporate more specifically what will be available to everyone and what our participation and our expectations are of the citizen. That would make what's already in here plus that just be one heck of a document.
I totally agree. It's an excellent document. It's reader-friendly, and I think the language and semantics are very clear. Is there any way we can get the Irvine Foundation to donate another 1,000?
Go ahead, Ms. Schaefer.
Again, I'm Trudy Schaefer for the League of Women Voters, and I will speak for the Redistricting California Alliance. I was making notes to take away from this meeting or to speak to you, and funding and the limitations of all of these organizations is always a major consideration, just as it is in the budget of your commission. So I'm sure you've got a number of members of the collaborative watching right now, but I will make certain that that question is addressed to the Irvine Foundation. They've been very generous to this point, as you've heard and repeatedly, not only in this pocket guide, but in the funding for the 6 technical assistance centers that are going to be set up to help the public. So I'll certainly pass that word on.
Now, 1,000 may not be enough. We have
Well,
50 venues.
I know it. I mean, as an organization that ordered 500, and we were just one small piece of that, I know that, in fact, there's a need for these, and certainly I would hope that as you do your outreach public input meetings, that you'll have the opportunity to hand this out or something, make some kind of arrangements, but
Yes.
I obviously can't speak to the funders, for the funders.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. And just to let the public know, each of the commissioners actually did receive a letter from the Irvine Foundation indicating the organizations that they funded to help with this effort. So we hope they will continue to be as generous in helping us achieve our goals. So I think that we're not going to try to define education. I think that there's probably a role for the commission to play, minimally, of course, is deciding on an outreach schedule, deciding on the format of the meetings, deciding, what the form of that we want to receive input so that these other organizations can help disseminate this information to more broadly and widely. I think maybe there's agreement that we wouldn't do that dissemination per se outside of putting a website and at our meetings and all that, but a lot of that other work are going to be done by a lot of great community-based organizations. Commissioner Blanco?
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I think one possibility, we don't have to decide it today, is if the members of this collaborative are going to not only hand this out, but go and do some, go out into the field and, spread the word. Let's talk to legal counsel, but, if part of their education is introducing a commissioner and, whatever, I'm just saying, that's one way to also do that, is for us to collaborate in that way, and people get to know us, and we don't have to do those, again, as I think we have now decided, do those meetings separately. And we can always use this when we go out to our hearings, but maybe there's even more ways to, work as part of this collaborative education effort.
Great. Are there any final comments? If not, I think we can recess to go into closed session. Okay, with that, we are going into closed session for consideration of personnel matters pursuant to California Government Code, Section 1126A1. Sorry, 11126A1. We will reconvene just before adjournment. We're guessing sometime within the hour. So let's say 4:25. That's our ETA. This might be quick, it might be long, so we'll see. All right.